B2B companies pour millions of dollars into complex content engines every year. They commission 50-page white papers, host weekly webinars, and build intricate email courses. Yet for many of these companies, the sales pipeline stays completely flat. This scatterplot shows marketing spend on content on the vertical axis and conversion rate on the horizontal axis. Notice this massive cluster sitting directly in the top left quadrant. These are companies spending heavily on lead magnets, yielding almost zero measurable sales growth. The failure here rarely comes down to the quality of the information. You can have the most thoroughly researched ebook and still see zero conversions if that content fails to account for the buyer's current psychological state. To understand why, look at this schematic. This outlines the Howard-Sheth Model, a framework developed in 1969 to explain how buyers process information. It maps how input stimuli filter through a buyer's learning constraints to eventually produce a purchase decision. The core engine of this entire model is what Howard and Sheth call the psychology of simplification. This principle states that consumers actively seek to reduce their cognitive effort. They want to move away from heavy research and toward habitual, automatic buying. A 50-page guide creates a massive roadblock for a buyer wanting a fast solution. In this context, your lead magnet must align perfectly with your consumer's current level of product knowledge. The model breaks this knowledge down into 3 stages. The first is extensive problem solving, or EPS. This is a state of maximum cognitive load. The buyer knows absolutely nothing about your product category, and they have no idea how to evaluate their options. The second stage is limited problem solving, or LPS. Here, the buyer has reached an intermediate state. They understand the category and know what they need, but they are completely undecided on which specific brand to choose. The third and final stage is routinized response behavior, or RRB. At this point, the buyer is acting out of pure habit. They make their purchase with almost zero active information search. This creates a very strict marketing trade-off. You must align your information architecture to the exact cognitive load your buyer is currently carrying. Information architecture refers to the strategic arrangement and depth of your lead magnets and educational content. When you misidentify your buyer's stage, you misallocate your resources. Pitching deep educational content to a habitual buyer guarantees your content gets ignored. Pitching a quick promotional discount to someone who doesn't understand the category guarantees choice paralysis. Let's look at the requirements for extensive problem solving. A consumer enters the EPS stage when facing a radical innovation or a completely unfamiliar category. Think of a first-time home buyer or an operations manager suddenly tasked with adopting enterprise AI software. Psychologically, this buyer has no choice criteria, the internal benchmarks used to evaluate quality or value. Because they don't know what good looks like, they don't know what questions to ask. Because of this heavy ambiguity, the buyer becomes a dedicated information seeker. They halt the buying process to conduct active, independent research so they can establish the baseline rules of the category. This comparison matrix maps out the strategy. For the EPS stage, where active and heavy search is happening, your business must provide foundational education. This is where you deploy your ultimate guides, your comprehensive webinars, and your deep dive industry reports. Building these lead magnets requires a massive resource trade-off. They are expensive to produce, and they deliberately slow down the sales cycle. But they offer a massive strategic advantage. You get to write the rules of the category for the buyer. Content in the EPS stage establishes the specific benchmarks the buyer will use to evaluate the entire category. You're effectively designing the ruler they will use to measure every competitor.
As the buyer learns, they transition into limited problem solving. They now understand the product class. They have a mental shortlist of acceptable options, but remain undecided on a specific brand. Their behavior shifts entirely. The buyer stops asking basic questions and aggressively asks, which option is better? Updating our matrix, you can see the required content strategy for LPS shifts to differentiation via comparison. You need ROI calculators, feature checklists, and direct comparison sheets. Standard ultimate guides fail completely here. If you force a buyer to read 30 pages on why CRM software is important, if they are actively comparing you to a competitor, this redundant information creates friction and they bounce. Instead, you need to provide a shortcut. LPS content should focus exclusively on narrowing the buyer's choice set and proving your superior standing on a few specific attributes. A simple, well-designed checklist effectively filters out your competitors. This requires directly acknowledging your competitors in your marketing, but by providing the exact objective comparison the buyer is already hunting for, you drastically shorten the sales cycle. Finally, the buyer reaches routinized response behavior. They have extensive experience, they have strong brand predispositions. Purchasing is now an automatic habit, operating on a fixed track. Your marketing strategy here splits completely, depending entirely on whether you are the market leader or the challenger. Looking at our matrix, the incumbent, the market leader, must simply reinforce the routine. Because the buyer is conducting zero search, the leader's only job is to provide frictionless user experience and passive, reminder-based messaging to keep the habit locked in. If you are the challenger, your strategy is the exact opposite. You must actively interrupt the buyer's routine. You have to force them out of their habit and back into a conscious decision-making state. That requires disruptive trials, free samples, or massive discounts. Education fails completely for challengers at this stage. A habitual buyer will not download a white paper to convince themselves to change their preferred brand of cereal or their entrenched accounting software. They must experience the alternative with absolutely zero risk. Success in this final stage depends entirely on behavioral momentum. Marketers are fighting a battle of ingrained habits, and information search has effectively ceased. Now, take a look at your own pipeline. You need to audit your existing lead magnets against your product's actual position in the market. This decision tree flowchart starts with a simple branch. Ask yourself, is your product a radical innovation, or are you operating in an established category? If you are an innovation, your path is locked. You are dealing with buyers in the extensive problem-solving stage. Your budget must go toward foundational education and deep dive ebooks. For an established category, follow the branch to the next split. Are customers actively comparison shopping or buying habitually? Here is the final mapping. If shopping, build comparison tools. If habitual, deploy disruptive, zero-risk trials. Any piece of content you produce that does not set at the end of its correct branch is a leak in your marketing budget. The hard truth of the Howard-Sheth model is that most buyers do not want to be educated. They want to make a safe decision quickly so they can stop thinking about the problem. You have to match your tactics to their reality. You need the deep patience required to educate an uninformed buyer, and you need the sharp disruption required to break a habitual buyer out of their routine. Your conversion rates are a direct reflection of how well you respect your buyer's cognitive load. Audit your category. Identify the problem-solving stage your buyers are trapped in. Pivot your lead magnets to match that exact stage. Stop fighting the consumer's desire for simplicity. Give them the exact information they need to stop searching, and they will start buying.